Back with more college football coverage, and in this one, I'll be covering the CFP bracket in full. So to get straight into it, starting out at number 1, as was the case on Selection Sunday, no surprise, Indiana would earn themselves a top seed in the entire playoffs after becoming the only remaining unbeaten team in the nation, and also would, with this, get their first ever number 1 ranking in program history, after winning the Big Ten title for the first time since 1967. It is truly a season of destiny for the Hoosiers, but they have honestly been handling their business out there and then some. And it all starts with the balance that they've implemented at pretty much all 3 levels of the game. I mean, they obviously have themselves a quarterback in Fernando Mendoza V, who is more than likely going to win the Heisman after his overall performance on the year. Very risk-averse in nature, and although he doesn't even need to at times have these crazy, gaudy numbers in every single performance this season, he has more than done his own part to lead the team to victory on multiple occasions. Even if the schedule might not jump off the page to you in full, the team has definitely gone through their fair share of tests, whether it was beating Iowa in Kinnick Stadium by 5 points on the road with a last drive touchdown to Elijah Surratt to win that game, or also Penn State with a catch heard around the world from Omar Cooper Jr., who actually, per the numbers, leads the team in receiving this year to win that game in Happy Valley on the road. Although they could have easily blown those teams out of the water, those situations show that, hey, in close games as well, this is a team that you can definitely trust. Of course, that'll have to be proven in postseason play. This is new territory for them, completely. But don't be fooled. They are more than ready for their time in the spotlight here. Aside from their quarterback play, they have multiple 700-plus yard rushers on the season in Roman Hemby, the transfer from Maryland, at 918, and Kalen Black at 799 on the season, with them getting at least 7 touchdowns on the year themselves. This Indiana team would promptly be one of the 4 to earn themselves a bye also. So, it's going to be a little while before they play once more, but they've earned themselves this long-standing bye with what they've accomplished throughout the year. And that defense, the way that they can suffocate teams, especially in the red zone, as proven in the last matchup, they are as dangerous of a team to face off in the playoffs as anybody, or face off against in the playoffs, is pretty much all of the top dogs here. And that would be the interesting thing about this. Yes, we know what the committee can do, and we'll get to that sooner rather than later. But the first few seeds in this were essentially no-brainers for them. No matter what metric you want to look at to define a team's success on the overall season, they were able to sweep through them without really any thought. It definitely took a while in real time for them to be revealed. But they'd have a solid top 8 here. And Indiana would be the team with the most accomplished season yet to start off the seeding at the very top spot in the rankings. For the next seed at number 2, you would have none other than the Ohio State University take the 2nd seed and also nab themselves a first-round bye. And it was kind of surprising to me in real time as I saw that Ohio State would be the 2nd team off. I mean, I guess in a way, it might have been a given when you recognize that, okay, the Big Ten title saw multiple undefeated teams face off against each other, and it ended up being a close enough game, along with its fair share of miscues to where any number of plays that might have ended up differently could have caused a flip in the script entirely and maybe led Ohio State to win the game. I'm not even sure if that's how the committee viewed it, but no matter what, Ohio State was given the nod. They, for a while, had been number one completely and untouched in the rankings up until this game. So either way, whether they remained at number 2 or maybe dropped down a little bit, like I was thinking, to number 4, they were probably still going to secure a bye at this point. They'd done enough throughout the regular season. Again, even if their schedule might not be as desirable outside of the early win against Texas and the matchups against Illinois and Michigan later on in the year before this Indiana game, you got a lot of lackluster competition by that standpoint on the outside looking in. A lot of blowout wins against teams that just aren't even on the same par. Ohio was a lot closer than expected, but that still ended up being a blowout. Washington, Minnesota, Wisconsin was a shutout in their favor. So, yes, that could have been held against them in a way, but at the same time, they'd already gotten out in front beforehand, and it would take something truly epic to take them out of contention completely at that point. Truly. But the team can't be penalized, per se, for winning out their schedule and putting forth a good all-around serving of play on their own. I mean, we want to talk about Indiana's defense. In the same way, Ohio State's defense has been one of the top, if not the top defense in the nation. In fact, for them, they were the first team since Florida in 1975, as I mentioned after the Michigan game. They were the first team to hold each and every single one of their opponents under at least 17 points in 12 games since that time. Historically great defense of their own. And it's vaulted by a man in Caden Curry, who again reached the 10-sack threshold, ended up with 11 at this point in time. But they've got a solid front seven all around, between Caden McDonald being named Big Ten or one of the defensive tackles of the year, one of the defensive players of the year in the Big Ten overall, with his overall season. Sonny Styles and Arvell Reese emerging as a pretty good pass rusher. He's eligible for the NFL draft, so his stock has constantly been rising over the course of the year. And you balance that out with a tremendous secondary, including a guy in Davison Igbinosun who has managed to, for the most part, turn around his complete and total reckless play from last season, just getting penalized on multiple occasions. Like I tell you, man, it was a nightmare when that man was out on the football field. They would constantly just pick on him. Well, you can't really do all of that this season. And while Lorenzo Styles Jr. and Jermaine Matthews Jr. gave up their fair share of plays in the last game, they are also normally a pretty good pair of cornerbacks themselves in coverage. And when it comes to hitting especially, those Styles brothers, man, it comes from a man who had played for Ohio State before. So it's in the DNA, man. They can fucking hit hard, dude. Not to mention what Kenyatta Jackson Jr. has been up to over the course of the year. And, of course, Caleb Downs. Of fucking course. And you put together a defense that can, like Indiana, and with what they've been doing for most of the year, go toe-to-toe with anybody and make every single game competitive. No matter how it is that the offense might be performing at that point. Admittedly, it's been a solid year in ways for the offense. But I don't think the numbers will tell the full story. I mean, yes, you had Julian Sain put together a tremendous start to his Ohio State career. He is also a Heisman finalist after leading the nation in completion percentage, and I think still to this point, with the minimum amount of required pass attempts with 78.4% completion, 31 touchdown passes, and 6 interceptions. Well, that's great. Not to mention 30,323 passing yards. And, of course, while Jeremiah Smith would cross the 1,000-yard threshold himself with 11 touchdown catches, you just have a good amount of weapons at your disposal as well, between Carnell Tate having 838 yards on the season and 9 touchdowns of his own, or the Purdue transfer and Max Clare putting together a 448-yard season with multiple scores. Not to mention Brandon Ennis in the slot, Bo Jackson Jr. out of the backfield, who would, once again, get over 1,000 yards as a true freshman in his debut this season, and would get 1,035 and 5 touchdowns on the ground. However, it took a while for that rushing attack to pick up, and even then, over the past couple of weeks, one can argue that the efficiency of it has sputtered a little bit, especially if you're going to get into a situation where you put together your lowest output in a single game for your rushing attack since 2011 as a squad. Could that be looked at as limping into the playoffs a little bit in that regard? Maybe. As I said to end that off, it does kind of make a team think for a second that, okay, this Ohio State squad can certainly be had. They are not invincible by any means. But with what they've done throughout the season already, and the sheer strength of their defense alone, no matter what you get from the offense, like, you are dealing still with a top team in the nation in that regard. And on any given night, it's going to be difficult for most other teams to have to line up against them for possessions on end and try to score, especially when the field shortens up. It was kind of that way last season too, and albeit in games that were just much, much closer at points. Like, I think back to the Penn State game. I think back to the Nebraska game last season. And then not to mention multiple games this season. Look back at that Illinois game. How many times have you seen them put together a goal line stand where it looked like a team had a grand chance to get on the board? And it got down to 3rd and goal, 4th and goal. They continued to tighten up, keep a lid on the end zone, and prevented that team from doing much of anything for pretty much the rest of the game. A lot of the points that ended up being scored in a lot of these blowouts were garbage time points by these teams, who, out of pride, decided to just keep their starters in, knowing that they would want to at least get something accomplished on that day. But by those moments of the game, for the most part, it had already been a little too late. And Ohio State would just continue to take their own control. Another key point to note, and I guess I probably should have made that very clear in the Indiana recap. Ohio State, after being the only team in the FBS to avoid trailing entirely in the second half, they trailed for the rest of that game after that Elijah Surratt touchdown. And you could argue that even with some of the supposed rivalry games that they've had, even with them being put in this matchup against Indiana in the Big Ten title game, they had never gone through that experience as a team in the second half in terms of trailing. And you kind of welcome that as you defer and get the ball back trying to stack up a possession. But after that moment, like I kind of said, even if you can't control a missed kick from Jaden Fielding for 27 yards out, you can control your ability to weather the storm after those situations. And even though they made the strides to get down the field on multiple occasions and potentially take the lead or potentially top the ball game, they could not finish those drives. And that's what that game came down to. So in those situations, and especially in short yardage situations, are you going to be able to close the deal if you're Ohio State? They definitely had major success with that last season. But even with them winning the championship, that was last season, they've got to show what they're capable of in this one, of course. And again, they'll have their own time to get themselves back on the right track in the weeks to come as they await who their next opponent is. But for now, they can just work on getting some other game plans set and also getting a few other guys healthy. But that would be number 2 seed in the rankings. For the number 3 seed in the rankings, you would have none other than the Georgia Bulldogs take hold of the 3 spot in the college football playoffs. And, I mean, again, we're in a spot to move forward completely. I thought, again, that they would have jumped Ohio State in the rankings, given their schedule and the fact that they secured the Big Ten the SEC title game, and would win the conference entirely with it. Man, the name of the game, pretty much most of these teams who would secure a bye would be balance, and that hasn't been lost on Georgia either. Like, I kid you not, they have 2,864 passing yards as a team over the course of the year, and like Indiana, they also have multiple 500-plus yard rushers in Chauncey Bowens and Nate Frazier Jr., leading a rushing attack that also has 2,426 yards on the ground and 29 touchdowns as a team. That is the nature of their offense. I've been saying it time and time again. They want mightily to balance out everything and grind out a football game. They would much rather do that and put faith in a defense that, like the other teams, is in the upper echelon of college football. Although they only have 20 sacks on the season from what I'm seeing here, that doesn't mean much of anything. They force a decent amount of turnovers, and they just wear you down as an overall team. They've got weapons all over the place, and they're renowned for their front seven, who certainly made their own impact this season. I think C.J. Allen is a guy who has been looked at for potential draft consideration, and it's not hard to see why. You also have a few other cornerbacks who more than hold their own on the outside. So they're just as lethal in that regard. And that would be their key. They are a squad who's going to thrive on taking full and total control of the game. Even if you think that you have momentum on them for a second and they're playing from behind, that doesn't matter. Like, As Texas. As Texas. Soon as they got that shit to a one-score game, what the fuck happened to them? Georgia goes down, scores a touchdown, gets a fucking onside kick, scores another touchdown. It isn't even by virtue of their offense having to be as explosive and as flashy as some of the other offenses are in the FBS. They just take it straight to you, impose as much physicality as they can, and ultimately found themselves finishing with a 12-1 record this year. And yes, they had a few softball games thrown at them. I mean, one can question them facing off against Marshall and Austin PA State for the first couple games of the season, but their resume stacks up with just about anybody. Like, seriously, your only loss on the season. Your only loss on the season was against an Alabama team who would go on to win themselves 8 straight games after their loss to Florida State earlier in the season. And they had their own wins against a ranked Tennessee squad, against a highly ranked Ole Miss squad, with, again, Gunnar Stockton going absolutely crazy in that game, against Texas, and against Georgia Tech, along with other strong SEC wins in conference play. And after they secured the title in dominant fashion, they were definitely going to get themselves a bye. Definitely. One challenge for them, though, could be, in a way, on the outside looking in, their ability to work on the perimeter with their wide receivers. I seriously need to see them be able to stretch the ball down the field to Zachariah Branch. Even if that isn't necessarily the game plan, that adds another element to their team. And if you go up against the defense who can take away and force Georgia, even though they can be stubborn at times, just running the ball down your throat, if they can put a stop to that and they force them to throw, they have a much better chance of catching them off guard. Again, Stockton, as I mentioned, has been money in the fourth quarter. He's had good performances in conference play, despite what the numbers tell you. But even still, you would take your chances with having him try to distribute it through the air than having them pummel you into submission on the ground. And if you can't do that, well, Georgia's going to run right over you with your offense, suffocate you on defense, and even if it isn't the prettiest one in the world, they're not going to leave any doubt that they deserve to get the upper hand in a given matchup against a given team. That's how it is. So they would secure a number 3 spot in the CFP rankings. And for number 4, Texas Tech, after winning their Big 12 title, would manage to get the 4th and final spot for the bye in the CFP. And this is also well-deserved on their front. It's been getting thrown around on multiple platforms that they have one of the most expensive rosters in the FBS coming into this season. And I mean, yeah, that will certainly help you. Ohio State was definitely one of the top rosters in, I guess, overall income in that sense last season. And they ended up winning the championship, fair enough. Like, that's fair is fair. You know what I'm saying? There's nothing you can do about that. But still, even with money playing a factor in that, you as a team still have to go out there and execute throughout the entirety of a season. And boy, this team did. They have multiple 700 plus yard rushers on their front, with Jacoby Williams, I believe, a transfer, getting 787 yards and 6 touchdowns, and also Cameron Dickey bursting onto the scene with almost 1,100 yards on the ground, 14 touchdown scores, and an average of 5.5 yards per carry on 198. However, their strength, their undeniable strength, even without possessing a single wide receiver who had over 1,000 yards, their strength is in their passing attack, if you can believe that. They were an air raid offense, averaging one of the highest yards per game averages before Morton initially went down with his injury earlier in the season. And to think that they went through that, they had Will Hammond come in and sustain for a decent amount of time. Again, that very matchup, looking at the schedule here, like Utah, for example, coming right in there, still managing to beat the brakes off of them in what became a blowout later on in that game. That was impressive. He held it down for as much as he could as they continued to rotate in between the two quarterbacks. And it could have gotten even scarier when it was mentioned that Hammond would go down for the rest of the season. But Morton's always been the guy, and as we got later into the season, he proved exactly that. Exactly that. Like, conference play is always going to help you here, and for your only loss in conference play to come by just a 4-point deficit to an Arizona State team that consistently finds a way to win late games, and that has been the case for them over the past 2 seasons, including their entry into the CFP last year. Not to mention them going, facing off against Texas and damn near coming back in this game, making it an overtime match. Texas Tech ended up suffering a loss to them, and only them this season. It's pretty damn impressive. Every other game here has not even really been all that close by the end of it. I already went through and ranted about the West Virginia thing. But seriously, after that loss, you got wins of 42 against Oklahoma State. Fair enough, Oklahoma State, yeah, just not even close. 23 against Kansas State, at Kansas State. And then UCF, West Virginia, of course, and BYU on multiple occasions, including a 27-point win in the biggest game of the season to determine the conference champion. Rarely have they been touched this season. And, even though their offense has gone through these constant quarterback changes, even though they've had games in which they've sputtered for the first few quarters of a game on that front, despite being more explosive, their defense is yet another one that is world class. Yet another one. Between having 3 different tacklers end up with over 70 on the year, including Jacob Rodriguez, who was constantly getting thrown around as a potential Heisman candidate. I think that it was mentioned that he actually won one of the defensive awards, I would assume the Bednarik Award, for this season. Not to mention the fact that you had multiple guys end up with more than 8 sacks, including linebacker David Bailey, who would have 13 and a half on the year, to go along with 42 tackles of his own. And they have, overall, a solid defensive core of their own, with Rodriguez also logging 4 interceptions on the year, and their corners also doing nice work in coverage. They also get a tremendous amount of forced fumbles in general. 16 interceptions and they forced 22 fumbles while recovering 15 on the year. So, sure, bank on their offense having an off day for at least a good portion of a game. If you let their defense have their way, they're going to get them right back into it. No questions asked. And that'd be the challenge for any team who, given their bye, they'd have to go to Texas Tech and beat this squad. Or maybe they're in a neutral site. But it's impressive what they've accomplished on the year, even if, again, you want to look at the money component of things. They still got to go out and execute, and there is still a job for them to do. But it'll be a while before they themselves have to get back to playing ball. Aaron Morton as well, leading the way, is going to get them right for sure. I mean, the numbers don't do it justice because, again, he's missed some time. But to still have 2,643 yards, 22 touchdowns, and just 4 interceptions as a purebred pocket passer, like that speaks volumes. And as long as they have a steady hand, like they're going to be fine throughout the CFP playoffs. It's going to take a lot from a different team to be able to overcome all that, but nothing's impossible in this state, of course. And while these other teams don't necessarily have a bye, the 5 through 8 spots in the CFP would make a ton of sense when you truly think about it. So, for the number 5 squad in the CFP, the 5 seed would go to Oregon as they get a home game. And I'm not going to lie, like it was fair. I wasn't expecting them to drop off that far. I truly wasn't. As I was looking at it the whole time, like Oregon had consistently been on the upper end of the teams in the rankings. And I was just of the mindset that there's no way that you can penalize them too much. No, they weren't playing for a conference title at all. That would certainly not be the case after Ohio State secured the win against Michigan the week before. But for their only loss on the season, to come to an Indiana team who is now the top team in the entire thing would not have made much sense to me in my perspective. It just wouldn't have. And regardless of what you want to say, they themselves have had what one could see as strong wins this season between ranked Penn State, Iowa, and USC squads to close out the season. Their offense as a collective can go literally. We saw it last season. They can go toe-to-toe with anybody. Legitimately. What they've been able to accomplish overall has been pretty damn solid. Between Davison as a backup having 13 rushing touchdowns and also Whittington leading the way with 774 yards, for them managing to find a way to just distribute the ball to everybody. Think about this. They've sustained over the last few games without having one of their main guys in Decorian Moore in to play. I gotta see if they would be getting him back, but honestly, they've still got a good amount of time to see about his availability on the year. Because when he's in that lineup, the Moore-to-Moore connection is damn near money every time. And for a guy that is able to stretch the ball down the field like that, and they legitimately, unlike Georgia, will test a defense that way. They aren't shy of doing that. And more often than not, they've been able to find success because he is a truly dynamic player. Dante Moore on the season, heralding the quarterback position, had 24 touchdowns and 6 interceptions on the year, along with 2,733 yards on 72.5% completion percentage. Man, they are truly lethal on that front. And Autzen Stadium, since they have a home game, I mean, whoever they likely match up against in this situation is going to have a rough time in that environment alone. But don't worry, that defense has got enough damage on their front too. You won't notice it by the numbers, although Tuioti, their linebacker, leads the team by far with 7 sacks, but you also have Matayo Uiagalelei, who is also draft eligible and being considered. He had himself a strong season as well. You have Bear Alexander up the middle, being a force as a tackle in the very middle of that defense. There's a reason why they call him that. And your offense does not want to see that man manning the middle and possibly stuffing one of your running backs in the backfield. Also, with the way that Thieneman just hits from some of the Oregon games that I've watched this season, he would be a different player to watch out for. But their leading guy, in terms of the front 7, is without a doubt Bryce Betcher. Like, literally, somebody encapsulated perfectly last season about how he's essentially a center fielder. You want to talk about a guy truly being able to be a quarterback on defense and man the middle of that front. He holds the shit down. And it's not even close. 103 total tackles on the season for him, along with a sack, along with a forced fumble, an interception, 3 pass deflections, and an offensive score, just because. Like, that man is truly a weapon by himself. And where other, aspects of the defense may be lacking in your opinion, no, their cornerbacks are also a pretty solid core as well. And on any given day, Oregon can truly hold you in check as a team. I remember, especially when they were in the Pac-12, man, they get themselves in some shootouts. Believe me. The most points that they'd given up on the year was 27 to USC just a few weeks back. That's not really too bad. They have had some close conference games, granted, not to mention them losing to Indiana by 10 points. But for the most part, they've been able to win games convincingly. The one thing I will say that is the most revealing about this team and what might give teams an advantage against Oregon is that at times, man, they just go through these weird stretches. Like, yes, I'm not just referencing them losing 49-21 against Ohio State in the college football playoff last season, after beating them in the regular season by 1. And that's not something that you can truly hold against them. As it's constantly said, it's hard for you to beat an opponent multiple times in a single season, especially after you get tape on them the first time. It's difficult. But the fact that Iowa, while it is a ranked win, we know what the hell Iowa is as a team. And they held them to pretty much, when you look at it, field goals in this game. Pretty much. Like, it was weird. They did end up getting themselves a touchdown. But the fact that this came all the way down to the wire, you needed a last-second field goal to beat this Hawkeye squad. That, even though it happened early in November, could be a little revealing in terms of a game plan that another team might craft to take them down. Because when you make this team one-dimensional, when you force them to commit to one or the other aspect, I mean, they themselves thrive on balance with 2,961 passing yards and 2,621 rushing yards on the ground and 30 scores. They thrive on it. Take one of those elements away, force them into uncomfortable situations, and you got them exactly where you want them. And that, if that doesn't turn around in all this time, that could prove to be an issue. Also, there are moments where Sappington, despite being one of the more reliable kickers I've seen, like he'll just have weird moments in the game where he'll miss. Gimme field goals. Another situation that in playoff football you just can't have. But at that point, I'm just kind of picking on them, right? They haven't gone through too many defeats this season. And it's why they were still credited with the 5th slot in the playoff. For the 6th seed in the nation, in the CFP, it would be Ole Miss would get themselves a home game, and in the same way, under different circumstances, represent themselves in front of their fan base in the Vaught Hemingway Stadium come time for the beginning of the first round action. They also stayed put. And I guess the sentiment was they possibly could have been penalized simply because of a decision that Lane Kiffin decided to make, which would have been incredibly unfair. Again, there's been precedent for it. Instead, no. They actually looked at how they stacked up across the entire season and figured that this team, on a good day, man, they have an offense that can roll with the best of them. I mean it, 100%. We're talking about a team that has put together 37.3 points per game as a squad and is led mightily by true dogs out of the transfer portal, whether it be Trinidad Chambliss from Ferris State, putting together a season in which he had 3,476 total yards, 24 total touchdowns, and just 3 interceptions. We're also having Kewan Lacey put together a 1,279-yard campaign and 20 rushing touchdowns out of the backfield. And that's going to be Ole Miss's key. Because the threats that both of those guys pose as a rushing duo, it is unlike many in the nation right now. And yes, there are some teams that would miss out on it that have possibly stronger quarterback, running back, rushing duos. But in terms of teams that actually had a fighting chance at the CFP, Ole Miss has definitely got one of the better ones up there. And if you even think about committing to one of Chambliss or Lacey on the ground, well, the other is going to pop off, more likely than not, for a tremendous game of their own. And even that would be enough to lead them to an easy victory. It helps. It is a bonus that they have solid talent on the outside between Wallace III, who would lead the team in receiving yards at 719, and also Caden Lee, I believe he was returning, would have a 537-yard year. Multiple receivers for them, 6 in fact, had at least 360 receiving yards. So any one of them is a threat to get downfield, with them all averaging at least 14 yards a grab. All of them. And it's like, how do you game plan for that? if you're going up against that. Their downside can be their defense in a way. They had a solid, respectable year, don't get me wrong. They have players that you can, that you can look at and pinpoint as X factors for the team. Especially when you look at the secondary. Like I'm seeing one of these players right here, and Williams Jr. had himself 8 pass deflections and 3 interceptions on the year, along with 55 tackles. They are a team that kind of spreads out their pass rush. But Principal Emmanuel, would have 6.5 sacks on the season to lead the squad along with 32 tackles. However, there are some cases where they just, They're a team that would thrive on timely stops, but there were a good amount of instances where, against strong competition, or decent competition at the time, they had to go into an all-out brawl just to take them down in some unexplainable ways. Now, they did shut out the Citadel, but it's the Citadel, right? And they did shut out Tulane. Keep that in mind later, but it's Tulane. LSU, I watched that game live and did talk about it. It was a solid defensive outing from them. They kept Nussmeier and that squad on the fritz. LSU could not run the ball against them. Fine. But then you get in situations where you're giving up 23 to Kentucky. You're giving up 35 to Arkansas. 21 to Washington State. You let Georgia outpace you in the aforementioned loss. But again, stronger loss to one of the better teams in the nation. Fine. 26 to an Oklahoma team who have been struggling to find their offense by that point in the year. That could be a little interesting. Also, too, while they both provide the threat, they all have their moments where they just completely lose all of their sense on the offensive side if Kawan Lacey is not a factor in a game. It hasn't been all smooth sailing for him. You know, the numbers will tell you that, but there have been a couple games or so where teams have been able to limit him and make this Ole Miss squad work even harder to get down the football field as a result of it. And while they were able to overcome that for the most part, that Georgia game was a good example of them not being able to last that. Also, Chambliss as well. Yes, he's done tremendous this season. And he has proven already that, you know, there are games with high stakes that he can perform very well in. But I do have to go back to that Georgia game and understand just what he did in the second half alone of that. If I'm not mistaken, like 5 of 16, I remember saying when I talked about that game, you cannot have a repeat performance of that kind in this situation, or Ole Miss will absolutely get out early. 100%. They can't have that again. Because that was your moment, best against best, if you can argue that. And he did not do a lick in the second half. And outside of one touchdown pass all the way down the field that's dribbling one of the wide receivers who was a top 4 accruer of yardage in this season, he struck down the sideline for a 75-yard touchdown game in that game. at that point in the second half. And that was one of the first plays. So everything else that could have possibly happened was just that underwhelming, that inept. And time again, they couldn't initiate the offense. They had to punt, and they continued to allow Georgia to get the upper hand on them. You can't have a repeat of that. But as long as that is prevented, this Ole Miss team is going to be formidable, to say the least. I guess there is also the fair question of how they will manage to perform under a different system. I'm sure that a lot of the same plays, they may be picked up on. But you could imagine that Golding, the person now named as the head coach, is probably going to run a different system. And it does kind of suck, right? Like, you have a little bit of time, I would say, to go through an entirely new playbook in that regard. Although there was the note mentioning that coaches that came from Ole Miss to LSU would now return in light of them making the CFP. So that might help some things. But there are probably going to be some slight deviations, nonetheless, that they have to try to pick up on as fast as possible. And on shorter notice than most squads. That could also be an issue. So it wouldn't be surprising to see them come out a little sluggish as they get back out on the football field. It wouldn't be surprising at all. But given what they would have to face off against, they'll probably be fine, I would think. All right, for the 7 seed in the college football playoff, you would have Texas A&M secure that spot, and they would just completely tumble earlier on before we even got to conference title week. Again, they had a grand opportunity to be the team competing for that. And legitimately, they're outside of their own defense that might have a few question marks. As an overall force, they didn't have too many bad, habits before that game against Texas. They didn't really have that many drawbacks that a team or an analyst or a pundit could look at and say, okay, well, this is definitely something that's going to give me a reason to completely caution your presence in this CFP. They started off as greatly as a team could at 11-0. And yeah, I guess people would have their own conversations about Texas potentially getting in or not. But nevertheless, they did not end up making it. They were not in the realm of possibility to do it for a while, and it kept flip-flopping, and yet you still allow that team to completely limit you offensively. It's not even like they had the craziest day of offense themselves, although Arch Manning played fine in that game. But they made an offense that is as high-flying and as dynamic as this can be completely useless in that game. Luckily for them, they had already accomplished enough in the season in a tough spot to where they were still going to be a CFP contender. And, 7 spot is not too bad for them. They still get a home game. And, they are still going to be a team that you just can't fuck with. You cannot make too many errors against them. And it's crazy to think about. Because this is both the pro and con for them in a way. You almost have to play perfect football to take them down. And they almost had to play perfect football to win. Why do I say that? Think about that Notre Dame game. Think about that. Came down to the wire, took a game-winning catch from Bevacqua to get the win. Texas A&M's defense at that point was suspect all day long. They could not stop a thing. And yet, it took just a few mistakes from Notre Dame, between penalties, between miscues, to lose that, despite it being a quality win for them on their resume. Or this game against Arkansas. What business do you have giving up 42 points to this team? And it's like they just constantly flip-flop. Like, their offense can be dynamic, but there are way too many times to count where they become turnover-prone as shit. And I think that is a reflection of how inconsistent but good that Marcel Reed can really be as the leader of the offense. Again, as the quarterback, it's not all about them, but it's going to fall back on him. Bruh, that Arkansas game saw him and Taylor Green, for that matter, just pissing the ball away, turning it over ad nauseum, and they still won the game. And South Carolina was the real, oh man, if they would have lost that game, that could have been even tougher for them. Like, that is the Jekyll and Hyde nature of this team in a nutshell. You go down 30-3 after having Marcel Reed and the offense as a whole commit multiple turnovers in that first half alone. And they rallied back with 28 consecutive points in the second half. Man, that is just wild. But when they're on their A game, oh, they are one of the best teams in the nation to watch. No doubt about it. 36.3 points per game as an offense. And they are relatively sound everywhere. The one thing that I do think could hurt them, in a way, even though they have supplemented this nicely, Le'Veon Moss's absence. Because that brother was toting the fucking rock when he was in and healthy. And it sucks that they lost him for the season. They've been able to recuperate that a little bit. They still had Reuben Owens II in relief and as a complimentary back anyways. Lead the team with 618 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns, along with Marcel Reed accounting for 3,398 yards and 31 total touchdowns as well, along with 10 interceptions. But yeah, their perimeter game as well. Yo, we came off of talking about how many weapons the Ole Miss squad had. Okay, well, you look at this fucking wide receiver core for the Aggies. Just between Concepcion, the transfer from NC State, leading the team with 886 yards and 9 touchdowns, and then Mario Craver, for a good portion of time, leading the league in yards after the catch, including his explosive, damn near breakout, if I can say that, game against against Notre Dame. And then not to mention Ashton Bethel-Roman as a guy who's come on a little late, I will say, but he averages 23 yards a catch on 20 catches. So even if you do find yourself in a spot where you manage to get a handle on Concepcion or Craver, there's still somebody else on that field that you have to worry about. And that alone can give Texas A&M the advantage to legitimately outscore anybody. I ain't going to say everybody, but anybody on any given day. the defense is somewhat all right when you look at just counting stats alone. 41 sacks for them is definitely in the upper echelon, and they have a man in Cassius Howell who leads their team with 11.5 sacks, along with 29 tackles. Dalton Brooks has also been a player that has come on for them late between some of the things that he's been doing. 55 tackles in the year, 3 sacks, pass deflection and interception into fumble recoveries. And as a whole, they don't force a lot of turnovers, which could be an issue in playoff ball, especially if they're in a situation where they are losing the ball control battle. At that point, you're going to want to have your defense get off the field as quickly as possible between forcing 3-and-outs and between forcing turnovers. And if they get worked enough on that front, that problem and that lack of ability to turn the other team over could be exposed. I will say. But hey, that, Texas A&M is a definite, fun, I should say, inclusion to the overall bracket, taking over the 7th spot here. And then for the final home game, and for our first 2 or more loss team, in the CFP, Oklahoma would remain at number 8 to secure their spot in Norman. And again, not really any controversy there with what they had done over the entire season and how heavily important their defense is to their success. Because now we got to turn this around completely. We've gone through a stretch of teams where you can say that regardless or not of their defensive capability, they have lethal offenses all across the board. Well, this Oklahoma team, they are very much recognizant of their identity. They do not and aren't as necessarily concerned with having a crazy offensive output. They understand that if they get the game close enough, their defense is more than likely going to win them the football game. And that's just fine. Yes, they do average 26.4 points per game here. But, man, a lot of that came from some of the earlier work in a lot of the non-conference play that they had. Between them putting up 35 points against Illinois State and also putting up 44 against a trash Kent State team. When we got into conference play and against Michigan in what was a truly defensive-minded battle, they cracked 30 points one time against Tennessee in what would be a win for them. Every other game saw them put up about 24 points, or 17 at times, and they'd still come out with the victory. Their losses are definitely some rough ones between a Texas team that would try to creep back into contention. But by that point on October 11th, in Mateer's return after being injured for a while with a hand injury, they definitely made things look ugly for that entire offense. They couldn't move the ball down the field. Mateer was very turnover prone on his regard in his return. And it felt like since that moment, like Oklahoma had a great start to the year, 5-0 and everything. Since that moment, it's been sloppy, to say the least. They've won. And again, winning in the SEC is going to count a whole hell of a lot. But it has not been pretty. Again, do they care about that? Hell no. But my goodness, man, there have been too many games in a row, in fact, where Mateer has completed less than 50% of his passes, but that hasn't mattered. And luckily for them, they've had a man in Xavier Robinson who has come on strong as of late in a few games, but they're rushing attack. And this is something that could also be a strike against them, because if you're going to truly have a balanced attack, you want to be a bit more effective overall. They don't have a single 500-yard rusher on this team. In fact, Blaylock, a man who would be phased out in a way because of his lack of ability to truly be effective, he only has 444 rushing yards on the season. And Xavier Robinson is at 417. You could argue that they are two at times, understanding that it's not all about the quarterback. They are too John Mateer reliant for their own good, or at least were earlier in the season. Because one could say, okay, he wouldn't have gotten hurt if they didn't spam the run with him, leading the team in rushes with 130 yards on the ground. Well, rushes overall. And that definitely banged him up. They're not going to blow you away too much on the outside as well. Their top three is solidified. Isaiah Satania III has proven to be a burner throughout this entire season. Deion Burks, the transfer from Michigan, had a solid year, but you probably would have expected a little more than just 513 yards from him. And then Jaren Kanak had 511 yards on the year as well. Has not caught a single touchdown pass, interestingly enough. So it's like they do not generate a ton of true scoring opportunities in terms of touchdowns. But, more often than not, with how close these games have been, it came down to their contributions on the defense, man. It came down to that. Whether it was Brent Venables in that game against Michigan that I talked about, picking apart that Michigan offense. Whether it was against Auburn, with the defense as a whole and R. Mason Thomas helping to contribute a team and school record in sacks in that game. Stymieing South Carolina completely and bouncing back in that game. And ultimately they would lose to Ole Miss, but again, in a situation where they are playing from behind and have to try to go score for score with the team, they're not going to win. They're not going to find success. But if they can get out in front and hold you down as a defensive unit, they're going to be just fine. Just like they were in these next couple of games. The difference in this Tennessee game was literally a scoop six and multiple forced turnovers on a Tennessee offense that had been rolling but had been dealing with their own struggles as well. And then Mizzou, yes, they took great advantage of just a lack of real talent to go up against by that point. Nussmeier had already gotten hurt. They'd been down several key guys. Still got to go out there and perform. And so they beat LSU here. Mizzou, Zullers is obviously a new guy in the scene. So it wasn't going to be pretty for Mizzou regardless. In their offense, again, Mateer is not perfect. He's very inaccurate. And all it took was a couple of touchdowns. The defense ended up being all right. More than all right. And it's like, hey, things like that, man. When you have a defense that you can rely on that much, as long as you are in a reasonable margin, And in a way, as it was mentioned on other broadcasts, you could say that Oklahoma would be in a similar situation here. At least within 10 points. At least within a single possession. If you're there late in the game, you best believe that Oklahoma is going to find a way to muscle out a victory. If you have a greater lead on them, you're probably going to win the ball game. So while Oklahoma might have one of the weaker offenses out of any team in the bracket, their defense is their calling card. Just like it's always been for Venables. I mean, this is the same man who was the defensive coordinator at Clemson during all of those championship runs. So he knows what he's doing in that regard. But you would like them to clean it up at a few spots on their team. However, as we get into the later stretch of this bracket, oh man, we would get some controversy. Truly. Starting out with the very team that Oklahoma now has to go up against again this season. This time back in Norman. As we remember them completely stuffing an Alabama team that had been red hot to that point. They couldn't do anything in that game. And when it came down to it for the second straight year, this time in Alabama, the Sooners would take down the Crimson Tide. Speaking of the Crimson Tide, they're the number 9 seed in the CFP bracket and will face off against Oklahoma in Norman for the second time this season, for the third time in the last couple of years. The thing about this that intrigued me was that, hey, bro, look, all right, we get the SEC thing. It just means more than the SEC. Look, man. Yes, can you truly penalize them for getting into a spot where they made the conference title game? No, not really. And from that standpoint, okay, fair enough. You can't do that. But the way in which they lost to that Georgia team, even if their defense wasn't necessarily that bad, the way they got worked as an offense. And they don't move an inch. They don't move an inch. They don't move at all in the rankings. Like, that was just, as soon as I saw them pop up, I'm like, oh, that's bold. That's bold. Because there's no way, dude. There's no way that you see a team go out like that and think that they are still deserving of the exact same spot. Granted, with the way the format is, there's not too much room to really move them around at that point. You're not going to... It would have been bold for them to move up after a loss. You're not going to do that. So you got to figure something out. I guess they were just content with having them stay put exactly where they are. So let's talk about it, though. Between how it's looking for Alabama and I guess that matchup at the end of the day, now that we're here. So like I said, Florida State, the fan base was definitely salty right then, right there when it happened. But like I said, before that Oklahoma game, they've been rolling, man. 8-0 streak there with Todd Simpson looking like a Heisman quarterback, with receivers getting fed all around, and with a glaring inconsistency that could prove to be a problem for Alabama. A glaring inconsistency. What is that inconsistency? What does that problem look like? They don't have a run game to speak of. I don't think that's surprising anybody. They do not have a run game to speak of. As soon as Jan Miller went down and is now out for the season, they are trying so hard to find answers, and they haven't gotten any. They've looked everywhere. Do you know that outside of Jan Miller, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 different players, including a few backup quarterbacks at times, including no lineman in Caden Proctor, logging runs on the season. Just to supplement that weak spot in their team. Think about this. As a collective, they've logged 424 yards, 424 carries, I should say, on the season. And granted, some of Ty Simpson's carries are going to be sacks. Keep that in mind. Still, as a whole, 3.6 yards per carry. 3.6 yards per carry. And granted, Oklahoma themselves, who they'll be facing off against, has not had the greatest year on the ground themselves. But at least they can say that they're trending in the right direction with a true freshman running back who appears to be primed to become a very good player. They don't have that right now, Alabama. They, in fact, are trending in the very opposite direction. It has only gotten worse. That Georgia game saw their leading rusher, Daniel Hill Jr., run for just 11 yards. 11 yards in a high-stakes ball game, nearing playoff time, is damn near inexcusable. And if you come with that weak shit, while being unable to implement any sort of passing game, that's exactly how they got against Oklahoma in that matchup. That's exactly how they got against Georgia in the conference title game. They have the weapons. They have the weapons, man. Bernard has definitely become their most reliable one, with 762 yards in 7 receiving touchdowns on the season. Williams has 631 receiving yards on the season as well, 42 catches and 4 touchdowns. But even then, between his drop problems, there have been a few games where they just froze him out completely and then favored a few other guys like Isaiah Horton and Latsier Brooks a little more. So even that at times, though it's looked fun, and though Ty Simpson put together a season where he had 3,268 passing yards and 26 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. I mean, it still ain't pretty. Also, he has gotten himself in situations, especially in that Oklahoma game, where key fumbles led to easy opportunities for the opponent. So again, just a lot of stuff there they need to hash out offensively. Their defense is pretty solid as well. It is solid. Yonge Pierre, has definitely come on as a bit more of a force from them. 6 sacks on the season, along with a pass deflection and 3 forced fumbles. And they've got strength everywhere. Hill Green, the transfer from Colorado, didn't log a sack this season, but was one of the top tacklers on the team, while also enforcing 2 fumbles and recovering 1. Justin Jefferson is a returning man and led the team in tackles, had 2 sacks, had 5 pass deflections, and had an interception as well, along with a forced fumble. Deontay Lawson and Bray Hubbard are also returning men, with Bray Hubbard, I think, being named to an all-conference team for his defensive efforts, logging 4 interceptions, 8 pass deflections, a sack, 61 tackles, and also 30 forced fumbles. So yeah, he's a bit of a force as well. They've got the talent to keep up on that front. But if your offense is going to constantly sputter out of absolute control like that, as we saw in the Georgia game, right? How much can you truly do as a defense at that point? And so, in regards to this Alabama-Oklahoma game, which will be in Norman again, they lost in Norman last year with Milroe at the helm. They lost in their own house by 2. Simply because they could not protect the football. And it's going to be the most obvious thing for them. But the key in that game will be to protect the fucking football. It is like Oklahoma's won that battle every single time over the past couple of seasons when they faced off against each other. And in a convincing fashion. It hasn't even been that close. And luckily for them, they had a much better offensive output the second time around. Because, like, even without Oklahoma having to do much in the first iteration of it, they beat their asses by 21 points in that game a few years back. So that could have been much worse this season. It's just gut-wrenching as an Alabama fan. If you were an Alabama fan, I don't know, that would be pretty damn crazy for you to switch up immediately after that. I'm not going to lie to you. But hey, excruciating to watch, gut-wrenching to watch from that perspective because you had a chance in this one. If only you protected the damn football down the stretch, and you just did not. And that's what Oklahoma, a team like them, is going to want to do as an opportunistic defense. I didn't even mention how different players on that team were performing between Bowen, between Lewis, who leads the team in tackles, as I just saw. R. Mason Thomas, I'm not sure about his availability to return. They still got other defensive weapons there. Not to mention guys like Heineke have also become key staples of this team on that side of the football. All of them pose a tremendous challenge to this Crimson Tide squad. And, they've got more than a week to prepare. They've seen this team multiple times under Kalen DeBoer's tenure already. You've got an extensive amount of film on them. You need to get ready. Even if your run game isn't necessarily your counter, because I really don't know how they resuscitate that. Jam Miller himself didn't cross the 500-yard threshold, but he was your strongest guy. And even then, with the way he'd been utilized over the past few games, it felt like they were losing a little bit of trust in him. Then he goes down for the season. And you don't really have a contingency plan. So that might not change. But you've got to find a counter. Because this Oklahoma defense, for as formidable as it is, they aren't completely invincible if other teams have been able to get the beat on them. And again, one way is by protecting the football. But there's got to be another method for you to move the ball down the field. There's got to be another way. Because you cannot let yourselves go out like that again. You just can't. Third time's the charm, they say. You have to find a way to dig deep and win the ball game. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that, man. Straight up. And for the number 10 seed in the CFP rankings and for the CFP bracket, you would have Miami at Florida get in. And they would overtake Notre Dame. I'll get into that when dealing with any team who might have felt as though they were snubbed from rankings. Because, we got a lot of shit to talk about there. But for Miami, at the end of the day, the committee kept on hearkening back to the very first matchup of the season. And yes, while the defense would essentially say at multiple points that, hey, you can't constantly look at all of these early season out of conference matchups is things that matter in these. This Notre Dame team is completely different than what they were at that point in time. Maybe that's the case, but at the end of the day, it became, as everything enveloped, it became too difficult for this committee to overlook the fact that Notre Dame did in fact lose to Miami on the very first game of the season. It became very difficult to do so. And I will say that the path to get here for Miami was weird regardless. I just, man, look, bro. Look. Man. I don't know. They also, like a lot of the other teams in this, have a very, and I mean a very good defense. Bain Jr. has been projected at times as the top overall pick in the next draft. He's definitely a fucking monster. But they have, in a similar way, weapons everywhere on that unit. There's no denying that. Yet, this is a team that at times, they can't get out of their own way. I'm dead ass. They can't get out of their own way. Like, yes, they won a lot of the gimme games early, and even this Florida State game that launched them to 5-0 was a lot closer, at least by the box score, than it truly was when watching it in real time. Like, for a Florida State team that at that point, I kid you not, was averaging around 60 points a game and damn near 600 yards for a stretch of time, they held them to 3 points when that game actually mattered. So they have a formidable ass defense. But offensively, for a couple of their next ball games, following a bye that they had after the game, you got the full Carson Beck experience, yeah? Let's just put it like that. Game-ending interceptions in both the Louisville and SMU game. And in Louisville, he had 4 interceptions in that fucking game, and you lost it. Wouldn't it have been easier to just win one of those? Instead, you lose those games by a combined 9 points and lose to the Mustangs in overtime to drop to 6-2 at that point, and very much in danger of missing the CFP entirely. Now, you have to credit them for working their way back into it. And at that point, the head-to-head was really all that you could rely upon. Because if you were looking at other things, it was truly a toss-up. They threw out how close it was from other metrics in terms of strength of schedule and other criteria that they want to consistently throw around the committee. It was genuinely that fucking close. They had their pick at that point. And at the end of the day, they decided to be somewhat fair and be as rational as they possibly could in that situation. Despite how sloppy the Hurricanes had looked at times this season. And hey, I mean, offensively, they've got a solid run game, with them having 1,800 total yards in the season on 4.2 yards per carry and 23 touchdowns, with Mark Fletcher Jr., returning player for them, accounting for 10 rushing touchdowns and 685 rushing yards on the ground. Man, Malachi Tony. In Malachi Tony, they most certainly trust. In a season for him as a true freshman, he accounted for a total of 101 total touches between rushes and receptions, a total of 1,059 yards, including 970 as a receiver, and 8 total touchdowns with 7 receptions. and added 2 passing touchdowns this season. He's a fucking beast. There's no question about that. You also had CJ Daniels Jr. and Keelan Marion emerge as complementary pieces to him. But it is all about Tony for them, or nothing at all. And that could be a problem if they are going to be so heliocentric in that regard. They're going to need their other guys to step up. Because come playoff time, and with the way that some of these other defenses are, not to mention you account for Malachi Tony's frame, as he is, I believe, 5'11", yes. Fairly decent. But you are going to go up against some corners, if you are Miami, that tend to be a bit more physical and might have a size advantage on Tony. And in that moment, while he has the speed to get past anybody, they're going to play him over the top. They're going to have zones ready to stave you off entirely of trying to hit him on a few timing routes. So now you have to figure out what the hell you're about to do. And that could be a struggle for them, admittedly. Carson Beck in the season had 3,072 yards and 25 touchdowns and 10 interceptions on the year as well. And that's all solid. Miami, as a 10 seed, will have to face off against Texas A&M. Yeah. So, exactly as I said, you have a great opportunity for Miami to completely limit Texas A&M. That is, even if people think that Texas A&M can win that game, that is going to be even more telling and a lot closer than people would think. You want to talk about strength for strength. Brother, man. Oh my goodness. Literally. Texas A&M's offense, as dynamic as they are, having to deal with Miami and that consistent pressure they're going to get from that front four all night long. It's going to be tough. It's also going to be just as tough on Miami, especially if this Texas A&M defense, off of a solid amount of rest themselves, can figure out ways to get after a guy in Carson Beck who can't move, or limit a rushing game that at times has not been existent for Miami in a few games this season. And you force Carson Beck to consistently drop back, because at that point, you can't run the ball. Beck has been reliant on play-action plays, and those just aren't going to open up like that if the run game isn't an element in that offense. So that is the perfect one-to-one matchup. I can't project anything in terms of who would win that game or not, but man, that should be a fun one. That should be a fun one for sure. I guess that point of it is also worth noting in teams that might have felt as though they were snubbed. So that'll do it for Miami's inclusion in the CFP, at least from their perspective in terms of talking about it. For the number 11 seed, you get a group of 16 in Tulane. Yes, it looks different for them on the actual CFP rankings, but you need a couple of G6 teams per the format. So Tulane would get the first spot here. And as it was breaking in, I was like, I had my jaws completely open up, because I'm like, dude, there's no way that the team that I'm thinking about is going to get passed over again after another great season from them. But Tulane did truly earn their spot. Of course, they secured the American Athletic Conference title against North Texas. And for them this season, They have been a sneaky roster, to say the least, man. Truly. Like, it was interesting the way in which they got some of their transfers in the first place, namely Retzlaff. And I don't know, although it hasn't all gone smoothly, they've managed to figure it out just enough to give themselves a respectable year where they were consistently in contention for the CFP bid automatically for G6 teams. Like, I could very much question them giving up 31 points in 27 in back-to-back games against South Alabama and Duke earlier in the year, but you know what? They won those games, right? And then down the stretch, between them knocking off Memphis and North Texas, that just signified how the G6 was in general. Like, at one point in the season, one team like a Memphis, like a North Texas, had their own high chance of getting an automatic bid in the CFP. And then it constantly shifted because they would beat up on each other. Tulane can say that they were essentially one of the last teams standing here and won in convincing fashion. But as I said, it was not all that smooth. I don't know. I can't explain to you how they lost to UTSA by 22 points on October 30th. And I can't really excuse the fact that they are now having to deal with the same situation that they dealt with earlier in the season. Because I'll get into their overall year in terms of production. But for their matchup, they have to face off against Ole Miss again. Yes, that Ole Miss team that beat them 45-10 earlier in the season on September 20th. So, that is tough. And they weren't just beaten into a pulp. They said that Retzlaff was the leading passer and rusher in that game with 56 yards and 51 yards respectively. They weren't even close to competing in that ball game. And it does kind of suck in Tulane's case that they may very well have to deal with the same thing. I mean, you can't really say, yes, it is tough. It's tough to beat two teams. It's tough to beat the same team two times in a season. But at the same time, one can say that Tulane and Ole Miss in this situation do not match up all that well, and it mostly favors Ole Miss. We just gotta be honest here. Tulane has definitely had a respectable season. Don't get me wrong. Retzlaff came over and just completely, turned it around for them in a way. They've been getting after it over the past few years. But to now say that they've got a chance to contend for a championship, I don't think they could have really thought they would end up here. But here they are, right? He accounted for a wild year, too. 3,472 total yards, along with 30 total touchdowns, including 16 on the ground and 6 interceptions. And I guess that is just the offense that he's suited for. They were doing similar things at BYU. That's no different. So from that standpoint, if they can somehow, some way, get a hold of ball control, as Duke managed to do against Virginia, in theory, they could win the game. Their receivers, they don't really have one that appears to stand out all that much, but they have a good bot committee system that would account for 3,126 yards themselves in total. And defensively, I mean, that is an issue for them too, right? Yes, they held North Texas in check. They held them in check, absolutely. And they did shut out Charlotte at Charlotte. But again, between them getting gashed by Ole Miss, between them giving up 32 points to this Memphis team, and then 24 to North Atlantic, the consistency for them is a bit of a problem. And against an Ole Miss offense that is dynamic as they have been, they already understand this after losing by 35 points. Like that could be tough to battle against. Again, it would take a truly drastic turn of events for them to figure out a way to counter with a potential win and get potentially one of the bigger upsets in playoff history. Truly. It's not impossible, but it's like, it might be incredibly unlikely for them. Whew. Okay. Moving on to the 12th seed in the college football playoff. And again, this would go to another G6 team. Even though they are not actually the 12th ranked team by the full CFP rankings, they would get the 12th spot. And it would finally be James Madison to secure the final CFP spot in this college football playoff. And man, what a time it has been for them. Because after years of getting royally screwed, they now finally get themselves a chance to showcase their talent on one of the biggest stages. It has truly been a long time coming for them. I mean, I looked at something else on ESPN's college football page, and a lot of this information was already understood given some of the graphics that they threw out on the broadcast. For them to go all the way from contending for FCS titles less than a full decade ago, then they've recently entered the FBS D1 play and have carved out a bit of a blue blood opportunity for themselves. Not fully, but at least in the Sun Belt Conference, they are bowling. As I mentioned, 40-10 since entering the FBS. They've been one of the better programs in the past few years. And yet, in their first ever season of eligibility, they went undefeated, and yet, per the rules, they didn't even get considered for postseason play. The rules, right? Shit's lame. You're telling me, dead ass, they had to rely on a 5-loss Duke team to win the ACC title just for them to get their shot to compete in the CFP. The fact that that is the case shows you yet another thing that needs to shift around, because that is fucking bogus. But you can't complain. They got here. They got it done. And the way that they operate as a team, even though their matchup is against Oregon, and even though all the odds makers and stuff are going to say that this is also a game that could get heavily out of hand for them, I think they got a pretty solid shot to give Oregon a run for their money in this game. Far more than Tulane can give Ole Miss a run for their money. They had their chance to do so, and they lost by 35 points. We've seen it. We had not seen James Madison against a team like this. And yes, I understand. Believe me, I understand that could be a problem. Their only loss of the season came to Louisville. The only Power 4 team that they faced off against. Fair enough. But I don't know. It is just something about the way in which they run their system that might give them the upper hand. Just might. You do always have to look at the disparity of talent. And Oregon has definitely faced off against rougher competition, so they've seen everything. Still, the balance that they possess and the fact that on the ground, they have been as efficient as they've been. 3,195 yards on 5.6 yards per carry and 36 touchdowns with Alonze Barnett, the third quarterback, the runner himself accounting for 14 on the ground, and Wayne Knight, aforementioned, accounting for 1,263 yards through the run. So, even if the talent isn't going to fully be there, if that is their identity coming into postseason play, they've got one part of the formula solved already. You can't spam it. Ultimately, if they force Barnett the third to consistently pass, yeah, this is going to get out of hand pretty quick. Fair enough. But if they stay true to their guns and they can actually back Oregon, as hard as it is to make that happen, if they can back them into a little bit of a corner, they've got themselves a shot here. Not to mention, defensively, one of their defensive linemen in West would account for 7 sacks to lead the squad. Xavier Holmes also added 6 sacks on the season. And as a team, they are also a team that has just 15 takeaways on the season. But even then, against this Oregon squad, it is just going to be about getting off the field quickly. And per some of these other games here, I mean, a lot of them just haven't even been all that close outside of Washington State, if we can say that. They gave up 23 points to Marshall. They gave up 27 points to Old Dominion while still putting up a 63 burger on them. So I'd say that they have a pretty successful rate of being able to get off the field in real time. And in terms of time of possession overall, more often than not this season, with what I'm seeing here, they tend to average 34 minutes. Now, again, it is not going to go that way, just streamlined against this Oregon team. I wouldn't expect that at all. But if you can dominate the clock at key moments, hey, you're going to be in good position to win this ball game. Crazy to say, and I don't think a lot of people would think that James Madison could actually pull off the upset here. But I'm not going to completely count them out. Maybe Oregon does still take the ball game. But at the very least, as long as they put up a competition, I think they still put themselves in a great spot. Now that they're here on a national stage, if they put up a remotely competent performance against this Oregon team, they'd love to win the ball game, and they'd love to keep Chesney Jr. around for just a little more time to continue leading the team before he leaves for UCLA. They want to compete. They're not going to sit here and take a fucking pity party from anybody and just say, oh, we're happy to be here. No, they're going to put out as much effort, as much firepower as they truly can against this Duck squad. So you can't take that lightly. But if they put up even a competent performance, that gets even more eyes on them. And all of a sudden, you can attract a few more good prospects, enticing prospects, to your roster. And there is value in that, whether or not they continue to advance through the CFP. That's how I would view that for them. As long as they don't go out how SMU went out against Penn State through the fucking TNT broadcast. Because both Tulane versus Ole Miss and Tulane at Ole Miss, and James Madison at Oregon, if I'm not mistaken, are both TNT games. Please put up a competent fight. Do not have all the shit ton of fucking turnovers that SMU squad had against Penn State in literally the first quarter, in the first half. It was over at halftime. Just don't have a repeat. You don't need people reliving that, okay? As long as you do that, and yes, that is still in a way kind of disrespecting James Madison a little bit. Like, they've shown that they can compete. But anything other than that, and we're going to have ourselves a good ball game, I would think. But that is the CFP bracket in a nutshell. Now for some potential omissions. Some teams that might have felt as though they were snubbed. And I ain't going to do everybody. But a lot of the noise. And I'll get to Notre Dame in a second. But I want to tackle BYU first. I can't believe y'all, man. Look, I was pulling for BYU to get in there. And I get the thing. Hell, I was saying myself after that game ended that if you're going to penalize BYU for getting the bricks beaten off of them in that game against Texas Tech in the Big 12 championship, you should get Alabama's ass out there too. You should. But then I remember, the SEC, it just means more in the SEC. Like, it's tough. It is tough to have to consistently hear that shit year after year. But the competition that they promote demands that overwhelming amount of respect. It does. And it's hard to really stack up against it when you have terrible losses. I think, honestly, that BYU might have still had a chance if that was their only loss of the season and if they had been more competitive. That's all we're asking for. But BYU, and although they haven't complained much compared to the obvious, they have quite the resume in other facets to stack up against some of the better teams. And, if they kept a mostly clean slate, they were very primed to make the CFP. And that was the odds for them. If they won the game, if they won the football game, they were going to get in it. And if they lost, they had less than a full % chance to enter the playoffs. And it played out exactly in that manner. Like, they are a very formidable team. Between the quarterback running back duo of L.J. Martin, literally combining to account for the most yardage between that pairing in the Big 12. Even more so than Utah, if you can consider that. And Bachmeier as a true freshman, although it hasn't been all clean for him, keep in mind that he's still been doing this as a true freshman. And I believe that he's going to get better with time. Their defense is also suffocating. Kalani Sitake has these guys rolling on that front. And there were some games where you could truly look and say, without question, that BYU in the nation played like a top 10 defense. Truly. And I would argue that they could give a good number of these offenses in the CFP a difficult time with the way that they play on that side of the football field. That is a fact. But they didn't keep a clean slate. They didn't end the season with just one loss. And both of these losses were terrible. Yes, you lost to a highly ranked Texas Tech team. But you also lost to them by an average of about 24.5 points. You played them the first time last month and you lost by 22 in what was a close game up until the fourth quarter. You played them again with the season on the line in a way, with contention on the line, and while you played them close, you allowed them to put up 21 unanswered points in the second half to blow you out again by 27. If you couldn't overcome that to this Texas Tech team being a CFP contender on multiple occasions, how would the committee believe that you could truly put forth your best effort when it counted down the stretch of a competitive playoff game? Like Texas Tech, by and large, is that caliber of team, and you didn't even measure up anywhere close to them in either one of those games. They completely made you play out of your element, limiting those things that make you that formidable of a team. What's stopping any of the other top teams from doing exactly that to you in this situation? From the committee's perspective. And it's like, from that standpoint, it's difficult. Alabama, at least, even if you want to go with the SEC thing, they did beat Georgia. They did beat Georgia in a truly competitive game to continue what was a tremendous streak from them, even if they already had a loss by that point. They made Georgia bend to their will, and they kept them at bay for enough time to come out with the victory. They can say that they did that. And even though it looked tremendously different in this one, they had the edge in that. Georgia, admittedly, is a tougher team to deal with in an overall tougher conference compared to Texas Tech. Like, just make the game close against them at least one time. One time. Win against them at least one time. And the Big 12 will probably have multiple teams in the CFP, with that being said. But they just could not overcome that struggle. And as a result, BYU would be left out. Also, BYU would clear the path for the committee to omit Notre Dame. Because, as it literally said on the ticker, once that game was decided, the committee stacked up Notre Dame and Miami side by side and looked at both of their resumes and made a decision right then and right there. And what's Notre Dame talking about? They chose wrong. They chose wrong. We're a brand new football team. We have a Heisman candidate in Jeremiah Love on an absolute heater, and he deserves, along with the rest of this ball club, to be included in the CFP for this season. Essentially, it has gotten chaotic. It has gotten so chaotic. It has gotten so chaotic for them. Oh, man. Granted, that's going to be the case with any team with any strong following, and you heard it. You heard it from the salty-ass Alabama and Miami fans last season when they didn't make it. Could you imagine if they didn't make it 2 years in a row and they played up to the caliber of a CFP quality team? Oh, they would have been livid, and it would have been even worse in that regard. But as for Notre Dame, we are going on an all-out war with this. They are not happy They are not happy about this. Where do I even start? I mean, let's look at the schedule, although it goes without saying. Because at the end of the day, you can look at that schedule and note in a similar way that with BYU losing to a potential CFP contender multiple times in unconvincing fashion, Notre Dame tasked themselves with having to go on a historical concept of running the fucking table just to make it. They would have been, if Notre Dame did manage to still get in, they would have been a team with one of the lowest ever rankings after being national championship runner-ups last season. One of the lowest. At a point, they were as low as 22 and had to climb all the way back up from that while being benefited in a way and hurt in another with a fairly weak schedule compared to others who made it. They lost in close fashion. Yes, that counts. That should count. But you lost in back-to-back weeks against a CFP contender in Miami, against a CFP contender in Texas A&M, and ironically enough, they're playing each other. You lost to those teams in back-to-back games and damn near took yourself out of contention. So now you got to work your way all the way back into it and still command enough respect from the schedule that you had remaining to somehow get it done. And it's like, at that point, if you're Notre Dame, you couldn't have it both ways. You had to pick one or the other. You can't control your schedule once you're in the flow of the thing. But for you to go on a tear where, yeah, you do average a shit ton of points as an offense. You do have Jeremiah Love and that rushing attack going absolutely stupid in these ball games. I can't sit here and lie to you. But the strength of the competition is. For the most part. Yes, USC at this time was ranked, and they're a rivalry up until it ends in a little bit of time, which again, still, when I talked about that, it's like, you can't put an end to that rivalry, as historic as it is. But that was their closest game. And that might have been their best opponent. Purdue, Arkansas, Boise State, NC State, Boston College, Navy, who they have beaten the past 8 times now, including that game that I decided to talk about. Then Pitt, and then Syracuse by 63. And by that point, Syracuse was trying to limp towards the end of the season because Steve Angeli was out for the season with an injury of his own. They had nobody back there. And they promptly whipped their ass. But that was enough to convince the CFP committee somehow, some way, after you had already nearly blown your opportunity to contend. You get strong wins, but you're not facing quality opponents. You're just not. Again, in spurts, Virginia was dealing with the same thing. Miami, rather, was dealing with the same thing. So at that point, again, the most fair and rational thing for them to do would be to look at the head-to-head. And yeah, you say in life you can't judge a person by their worst moments. You can't judge a team all the time by early stretches in the season compared to, how they finish out. Because it's not always about how you start out the season. Fair enough. But he got so damn close everywhere else to where you had to hang your hat and look back at that and understand that the Hurricanes won that game. Even if it was a while ago. And at the end of the day, that was the deciding factor. Notre Dame did not take that lightly. They had multiple college football reporters covering each of the teams who were potentially vying for a spot, who were potentially on the outside looking in. They said players were crying. They said they were incredibly frustrated with the process and disappointed in the result. I mean, that's fair. That's standard. Especially for the players. I mean, especially those guys returning. And not to mention, it was a good overall season. Again, Jeremiah Love is legitimately one of the final Heisman candidates for the year after a season in which he accounted for a total of 1,652 yards in over 20 total touchdowns. He was that damn good. CJ Carr, as a freshman, put together a hell of a season with 67% completion from the field, 24 touchdowns and 6 interceptions on 2,741 yards. But it's for those returning players, you literally just came off of less than a full year ago contending for a title against Ohio State. And you don't even get a shot to compete for extra time again. That you do feel wronged in that situation if you're a player. Where this really takes a turn is how this is being handled elsewhere. While I don't have those pages up, there have been multiple, and I mean multiple, reports essentially stating that the AD in Notre Dame has got a few good things to say about his absolute disdain for the ACC and what they did. Essentially, they're talking about an irreparable relationship beyond repair after this, because they believe, Notre Dame and Pete Bevacqua, the AD, that the ACC intentionally pushed Virginia and Miami for these potential spots, seeing as they represent the ACC over Notre Dame. And again, keep in mind, a lot of things would stem from this, because my accompanying question to this is, do they contemplate joining a conference now? A lot of these other teams in here that were on the fringe, even without Miami doing this, you had James Madison secure the conference title to get in. You had Tulane secure the conference title to get in. Notre Dame, as an independent school, doesn't have that to rely on. So again, I ask rhetorically, do they contemplate joining a conference? Well, if this thing goes a certain way, they probably ain't even thinking about doing that. They probably ain't even thinking about it. It's interesting, to say the least. Very interesting. I mean, I've been hearing a lot of different things about this. Because they just, I don't know, they want to stay independent for football. But as I've heard in other places, they are in the ACC and pretty much every other sport, including basketball. And actually, weirdly enough, They're in the Big Ten for hockey, if you can believe that. Yes, they are in the Big Ten Conference for hockey, but they do not have an affiliation with anybody for college football. Do with that what you will. And again, it's yet another situation where they may benefit in terms of, overall attention. Like, they are one of the only teams not in a conference to get this much attention. And they are one of the few teams out there with their own TV rights deals. So they definitely cash in. But you get to situations like this, and you might have second thoughts about not being in a conference. You just might. But clearly not enough to, play nice with the ACC. And, again, maybe they shouldn't. If you feel that wrong, I guess you're within your own right to say that. But it's like, I don't know. A lot of these things, I won't say that they feel like simple fixes, but I don't know. These are situations that could be prevented if you stave off some of your other traditions that you are accustomed to. And the fact that you are unwilling to change in that regard and evolve with the times has left you in this sort of gray area. So you can't really fault the ACC in that regard. And even then, there was a different report that stated a response from the ACC commissioner, essentially saying that he is within his right to protect his teams and protect the interests of those in the ACC. And that ain't wrong either. Now, that is not the most world-breaking news in the world. That's how, different analysts have viewed this. A good number of them. Like, you have actively gone out of your way to commit to a conference everywhere else but college football. And in this sense, Virginia, even though they haven't been that good, they're in the conference. Miami, even though they haven't really been in the glory days in a while, are within that conference. If they have an opportunity to get their guys in, of course they're going to work to get their guys in. I don't really think that's hard to see. And if you're Notre Dame, you can't be mad at that. I will say something that was petty. I was watching one of the First Take segments. Paul Fonbaum mentioned that they, on the ACC network, were running back the Notre Dame-Miami game every hour on the hour. Like, that is some next level pettiness. And I guess that's just the way to view this entire situation. Like, again, preventable things. All across the board. Like, and you pout at the ACC, I guess, for doing what's best for them in that situation. Maybe if you were with them, maybe they'd want to do this. And, granted, a connection is there. As this article states, it mentions it in one of these articles. Essentially, they have a connection with the ACC where they're set to play at least 5 of their opponents for each of the next few seasons. Read that in the actual article mentioning that quote. But yeah, it gets even crazier. They ain't done. They said they are not done. Literally just a few short hours after it was announced that they wouldn't be in, they withdrew from bowl season and opted out of it. Yeah, they did that. And again, in a sense, I kind of get it. There are multiple things to take into account here. From one end, right? You are still salty as fuck. But if you really think that, as one of their guys put it, the CFP process was a waste of time, given that they had been in contention for all that time just for them to get jumped at the last possible moment. They felt like they had the full rug pulled from under them. Okay. But yeah, if you feel like you're wronged, well, why would you want to continue to play for something that you believe, at the end of the day, corrupted you and your program? On the other end, though, this could work against Notre Dame. As I was saying right then and right there. Other people are calling it childish, and maybe that's fair. From my perspective, right? You know, bowl season obviously gives you extra time to play just like the CFP would. But I'm thinking, for Notre Dame, like, this is a chance for you, if you're Notre Dame. You're still going to have a good amount of eyes on you, and you get a chance to play in a bowl game. You potentially have recruits who might have planned to go to said game. You might have an opportunity to acquire that different talent simply by playing the game, meeting up with different scouts, having confidential conversations about whatever matter might arise there. And it just grants you even more exposure in general. And you lose out on all those opportunities by opting out. I don't understand why you would do that. Also, again, another good point brought up by things that I watch relating to this. It's like, the players may very well want to go out and do this, yet you are making an executive decision as a governing body to say, no, we're not going to do this. We're not going to do this for you guys. We're going to take our asses at home. Don't have to take this crap from you. Like, come on. I don't see the purpose in that. I just don't. Safe to say, though, if things pan out a certain way. According to multiple articles, they might have an ace up their sleeve. Per multiple reports, and as this article from CBS Sports states right here, Bevacqua said Sunday, language in a memorandum of understanding MOU signed by Notre Dame last spring guarantees the Fighting Irish a playoff appearance if they rank inside the top 12 of the final poll. In this scenario, Notre Dame would have been this season's final at-large selection over Miami, and Notre Dame's playoff assurance for being ranked inside the top 12 doesn't go into effect until next season, according to Yahoo Sports, end quote. Yeah, you heard that right. You heard that right. So again, I ask rhetorically, do they need a conference? Do they need to join one? Are they contemplating joining one now? If this holds true, maybe not. All they got to do is get inside the top 12, and they're good. All they got to do is get inside the top 12 of the final poll. And no matter what happens, almost in the way that they're kind of talking about it, right? So what? So what we lost to multiple CFP contenders in the first couple of weeks? We still deserve our shot at the end of the day if we finish at a reasonable standing. Okay. Okay. So that goes into effect next season, and as another article states, including On3 and Sporting News and Bleacher Report, end quote, as this states right here, should the playoff expand from 12 to 14 teams with additional at-large bids in 2026 or beyond, Notre Dame would still qualify for a guaranteed CFP berth if it's ranked in the top 13 on Selection Sunday, according to the MOU language per Dellinger. End quote. And there have been talks about this potentially expanding to 16 teams, with this, if that happens, nullifying this memorandum of understanding completely. And there have been talks about it, so from that standpoint, maybe they'd still be contemplating about it, because if they make this change in a short amount of time, well, at that point, you're very much going to be in that spot as long as you win consistently. So there's not really going to be a need for that specific language anymore. But it's still just crazy, isn't it? It's still just crazy that, like, it's not cheating. Of course, there are still restrictions there, but it's like, man, like, really, you're so. And I mean, I understand, as an independent, you don't have a lot of those advantages that true conference teams would have. So hey, I mean, I guess nothing was stopping them from getting a little piece of that themselves. But the real question is, will that really prove to help them all that much at the end of the day? Will it really? Because yes, they can still finish inside the top 12. But of course, they need a schedule conducive enough to get them there, right? Okay, so in a second, I'm about to switch this camera because CBS Sports, rather. FB schedules. I think I was trying to mix up the two. So they would show, although sometimes they're to be determined, they would show the intended schedule for next year. And just take a look at this. Feast your eyes on this, because in order to be a top 12 team, granted, they'll have a high preseason ranking, probably, but this looks like. Granted, sometimes they're still set to change, but these teams look to be confirmed. Wisconsin, Rice, Michigan State, Purdue, North Carolina, SMU, Syracuse, Navy, Miami, Stanford, Boston College, and USC. And y'all see that quote right there. So, as this article says beforehand, out of the 5 teams, and of their true road games and neutral site contests, the midshipmen, Navy, is the only one that finished bowl eligible this season. Meaning that their strength of schedule, because from what I've heard, it's based on how teams perform from the previous season. So you might solve the problem in giving yourself a layup to get to the thing and get to the top 12. But if you slip up even one time, you do realize that you're going to be penalized even further, because your strength of schedule alone is going to be incredibly weak. North Carolina, Syracuse, Purdue, Wisconsin, all of them underperformed this season. Every single one of them. Like, what? Again, yet another situation where it could help, but If you, again, like I said, slip up just even one time, you're kind of fucked. You're kind of fucked. Let's be perfectly honest with ourselves. It's like, damn, bro. Craziness, man. I don't know, given that the ACC commissioner just had this response, this could potentially get even more out of hand for them. But we'll see about that. As for a couple quick developments here, as I was looking at all of these different teams and their breakdowns on ESPN, a report just came through, possibly from Pete Thamel, essentially saying that Sam Leavitt has entered into the transfer portal. Bone crusher. And as for teams that are skipping bowl games, Notre Dame wouldn't be the only ones. Iowa State and Kansas State were fined earlier in the week for doing exactly that. Granted, that is also a part of being in a conference. Those guys will definitely want to keep their interests in line. And I know that Iowa State for sure might be a little salty with the way that their season ended. But I don't know. Granted, they want to get a head start on things in terms of potentially getting their new regime in order after hiring Jimmy Rogers. But again, having the exposure, seeing what he can put out in a game, even if it's a rough draft. That's important in this day and age. And you have to figure out a way to get out on the field. You cannot strip yourself of that opportunity if you're them. K-State is also salty. And apparently they made a coaching change, which I didn't know about. So, again, I get it. It's just like, dude, come on. Also, I guess from that standpoint, Duke themselves, by related rules to the CFP next season, would have also gotten a bid in the CFP. And again, I just could not truly believe myself if that were to happen. Because, oh my gosh, like, come on, bro. Come on, dog. That is just insane to think about. But that'll do it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.